You're just going to let us know whenever we're on. Our first guest is a leader who has spent his career at the center of some of Connecticut's most consequential moments. Luke Bronin served 2 terms as mayor of Hartford, guiding the state's capital through economic recovery, public safety challenges, and the unprecedented test of the COVID-19 pandemic. During his time in office, he worked to stabilize city finances, invest in neighborhoods, and confront longstanding inequities head on. Now, beyond City Hall, Bronin's public service spans the local, national, and international stage. He's a United States Navy veteran, a former federal official who served in Washington, and a lifelong public servant shaped by both policy and practice. Now, at a time when many voters are calling for new leadership, fresh energy, he's stepping forward once again, this time as a candidate for Congress in Connecticut's congressional district. Tonight, we're pleased to have a conversation about leadership, experience, and what comes next for our state and our country. Please welcome former Hartford mayor and congressional district candidate, Luke Bronin. Luke, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're joined with David Fortier, the editor-in-chief of the Bristol edition. So we thank you for coming here tonight on our show.
I appreciate the invitation and looking forward to the conversation.
David?
Great. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate the introduction. Luke, thanks for taking time to come out. I really appreciate it. I really do. And I think tonight what we want to do is we have an hour ahead of us. So we kind of want to break down the conversation into a few different sections. So we might get a little philosophical at some point. We also want to break down some of the to educate our readers on what leadership on the congressional level means for our local constituents. Yeah. So those are the kinds of things we're thinking of. We won't ask you to sing. I noticed in your background you have a song that's on was it Dawson's Creek?
Unless you wanted to. If you wanted to think, we'll take the tree.
Yes. I mean, your accomplishments are amazing. What you have here is incredible, and of course, the not the elephant in the room, so to speak, is the fact that you are challenging an incumbent who's going for his 15th term in Congress, John Larson, who is a champion, of course, of Social Security, and and he has some fairly substantial roles that he fulfills now in Congress. But along those lines, just to talk a little bit about and slow things down a little bit, government. I mean, when we talk about government today, I don't think anyone is on the same page what it means.
Yeah.
So for you and what it means as a former a person who was in the Obama administration, a former mayor of Hartford, you kind of existed in lots of different areas. So, but this is another iteration of that. So, but overall, government, how do you see yourself? How do you define it? And what do you see as your role, or a person's role as an elected official?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it. And, so you said we'd get a little philosophical. Maybe I'll start with the philosophical and just say, I think when we talk about the role of government, it's important to recognize that, over the last 45 years or so, basically my whole lifetime, ever since Ronald Reagan, what we've seen is a narrowing and a chipping away at what people expect from our government. And it was intentional. Part of the Reagan Revolution was saying we shouldn't expect so much from our government, starve the beast, shrink it down. And I think what that did was both shrink what we expect from government and also shrink our aspirations for what government can be and can do. It was a complete change from the approach to government that you saw during the New Deal in the years that follows, the approach that got us Social Security, that got us Medicare and Medicaid, that invested in our infrastructure and built the national highway system, that funded research that made us, a leader from the state space race to health. And so I think that we're at a moment when one of the things we need to do is start rejecting the notion that that we shouldn't expect better from our government, that we shouldn't expect more for our country than we've been getting. And that's one of the reasons that I'm running. I think we have to start changing the conversation. This isn't just about, winning Congress back for a cycle. It's about shifting the tide in our politics over this long course of the last few decades and getting back to a place where our government is actually helping to make America a leader in the world, and also helping to make it possible for families in places like Bristol to build a good, stable life where you feel like you can get your head above water, and the combination of housing and healthcare and electricity and everything else isn't so crushing that you're always behind. So that's where I'd start. And as you said, I've been I've had the opportunity, and I consider it a great good fortune to be able to be in service at the federal level, the state level, the local level. Those are all very different kinds of service. The kind of work you're doing, the kind of work I did at the Treasury Department in the Obama administration is very different from the work of being mayor of Hartford. But I think fundamentally, no matter what kind of public service you're doing, if it is rooted in the idea that it really is service, it really comes with an obligation to do right by the people you serve. That's what's at the heart of it.
And the distinction there, I think government and I think politics.
Yeah.
Do you make a distinction between the two?
In a sense, the first few roles that I had were in government, but they weren't they weren't political, right? I at the Treasury Department, I started right in the middle of the financial crisis. I was an advisor to the deputy secretary, so basically an advisor to the second in command at the U.S. Treasury Department, starting in 2009, in March of 2009. So right in the wake of the financial crisis, was part of the team that helped to respond to that crisis, including by putting together what became the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Financial Protection Act that created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to try to combat, financial abuses and predatory lending and all those things that they did. We ended up building something that did really important work until Donald Trump started dismantling it. And then I shifted over to the national security side of Treasury, and I worked on counter-terrorist financing, anti-money laundering, and the whole range of national security priorities at the time. A lot of it was focused on Iran and trying to get them to the negotiating table to do the nuclear deal. So that was about as far removed from politics as you can get. And then I came back and I was the chief legal counsel to the governor here in Connecticut for a couple of years. And in that role, sort of a mix of policy, law, and politics. And similarly as mayor, it's a mix of those things. But what I'd say about policy and politics is, for me, this may not be true for everybody who's in politics, but for me, politics is a means to do good policy. I don't do this work. I don't run for office because I love the politics. I do this work because I love the work. And to do the work, you got to do the politics.
Got it. Yeah,
that's great. If I may interject a quick question here. Now, Luke, is there anybody out there, anything like me, who doesn't come from more to politics, doesn't really understand as much as those who are involved in politics, right? So for the average people out here in the city of Bristol, I have two questions. My first one is, so the job you did prior, you said it's far-fetched from politics as opposed to what you're getting into now, right? What made you transition to say, you know what, I want to get involved with politics, this is what I want to do? And was the job prior to that unfulfilling, where you said, no, I want to do more? Or did you see that somebody was needed, someone like yourself, to be involved?
It's a great question. I loved every one of those jobs that I just talked about. And so, the first office that I ran for was mayor of Hartford. And I ran for that office after doing a couple of years as general counsel to the governor. And I ran for mayor more for the reason that you said at the end there, which is I just felt like the community that I had, that my family and I had come to call home, was not being well served. That it was a city, it's a great city. And yet I thought the mayor at the time was a good guy who was, I thought, making some big mistakes and missing some big opportunities. And so, I felt like it was important to offer a different voice and some different ideas, and worked really hard in that campaign. Knocked on many thousands of doors and had a lot of conversations face to face about a different kind of vision for where Hartford could go. And I found that I loved that work. I as much as I enjoyed doing the policy work at the federal and state level, when I got down to doing the work in the city level, where I always say you're face to face with your successes and your failures every day. You can't ignore the problems, and yet when you get something done, you can see it, you can feel it, and people and care about can feel it. I love that, and so to me, the job of mayor was sort of one of the best jobs imaginable, as tough as that job is.
Yeah, and last thing before we move on, can you break it down for the people of Bristol? What are you running for?
Yeah.
What's that position entail? What's that job description? Give us that LinkedIn version.
Sure.
And why you?
Sure. So I'm running for Congress. I'm running for the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm running to be one of the 5 members of Congress from Connecticut. And I'm running here in the 1st District, which includes the city of Hartford. It includes Bristol, and it includes 25 other towns from, small towns in Litchfield County, to a bunch of suburbs to the city of Hartford. And it is a big, diverse district. And the job of a member of Congress fundamentally is to make our nation's laws. But I think in this moment, the job of a member of Congress is also to help shape our politics and to help, I hope, kind of rescue us from what feels to me like a really dangerous path that we're on. Just more and more polarization, more and more corruption, less and less focus on what people just need every day, and bring that back to a place where our national discourse, our politics is about how do we make life better for people, and how do we make this country better at delivering a kind of life that everybody wants. And the reason I'm running is twofold. I mean, one, we talked about some of those other experiences that I've had. I hope that those experiences allow me to bring a different kind of perspective to the job of Congress. I think it's valuable to have somebody who's served in uniform in Congress. When Congress is facing questions like how do we respond to a president's use of the military, or to military actions that have been done without consultation with Congress, I think it's valuable to have people who've served in uniform be part of that conversation. And similarly, I think it's valuable to have people who've led communities and been responsible for managing fire departments and police forces and public works departments, and understand the impact of decisions on the ground in communities. I think that's valuable. And I think this is also a moment when, speaking as a Democrat, I think the Democratic Party's got to get some new energy and some new perspectives.
What energy are you providing?
Well, I think we need people who are focused more on the future than they are on the past. I know we'll get into a lot of conversation about the issues at stake in this race and why I've decided to challenge Congressman Larson. But, we've got a lot of new challenges coming our way. Whether you're talking about what artificial intelligence is going to do to our economy and turn it upside down, whether you're talking about the changing climate and weather and what that's going to mean for our communities, whether you're talking about the fact that we're building up crazy amounts of deficits and debts that are going to crush our kids and grandkids if we don't start asking those who make the most to pay a fair share. And so I think we've got to start offering some new answers. And fundamentally, if you believe in democracy, you got to believe in competition. And I'm running because I think we need some competition, both inside the Democratic Party and in this country.
Oh, fantastic. And before I toss it back over to David, one more thing for the viewers who may be watching this, because I know when I watch things like this, I'm sometimes confused by some of the questions or some of the conversations. So I just want to lay down a quick narrative here. What are some of the things that you can achieve if you were to be elected into this position? What will you be in charge of? What will you be doing? What are the people voting for in that regard?
Yeah, look, what you can achieve depends a little bit on who's controlling Congress. So I hope to be part of a group of Democratic candidates that are taking back Congress and making sure that Congress is actually doing what it's supposed to do, instead of just lying down and rolling over for a president that wants to seize unlimited power. So that's first and foremost is actually honoring the Constitution and saying our Congress has a critically important role, and I want to be a part of the team that's reestablishing that. But it also, look, no member of Congress can wave a magic wand and have all their policies get enacted. But if I have the chance to be in there, I want to be a voice, saying, I want more housing opportunity in this country, and there's things that our Congress can do about it. I want a sane immigration policy where, yes, we have, order at the border, but also we recognize that immigration is a critically important source of new energy and new talent and new ideas in our country. And no, I reject the idea that this should be a country where kids who've grown up knowing no other country than this one get deported to some other country when they're flying back to visit their family on holiday from college. When mothers are being detained by masked agents and taken away from their 4 or 5-year-old children and put in undisclosed locations for days at a time. I'm going to be a voice for saying we have to be a country where common sense reigns again. And, again, I'm happy. I'd love to get into policy discussion, but fundamentally, what I'm asking for is a chance to be a part of those conversations in a way that is representing these communities here.
I'm thinking again about Reagan, and I'm thinking again about some of the changes that were made there. And of course, lately it feels like we all need a refresher in civics. When I think about that, though, I do think about money, and I do think about private and public enterprises. And I'm almost thinking now, as you're talking, that the private public enterprise conversation has almost diminished the role of government in some ways. Like we want to say, enterprise has the markets, it's going to make things work, it's going to be more efficient, more effective. But I there's another part of me that says government is working fine in some areas. Not all, but people need to be employed by government to be able to do their jobs. And we've seen what's happened now with the decimation of some of this, with the result of DOGE and its effects. And it's kind of like a woo-woo kind of question, but the idea is, yes, government in lots of ways has fueled a lot of research and development in our schools and our colleges. It's done this work, and our private enterprises have benefited from it. But can private enterprises replace government? We always hear, I'm going to run this like a business. Seems like that there are two different kind of entities. And it's, and again, a philosophical kind of woo-woo question. But it's like, I really think that maybe we diminish the role of government by saying somebody else can do something better without really looking at and seeing what government's supposed to do.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there, but I would say, first of all, I think we should always be saying that government can do better at what it's doing. I mean, you should always be trying to make government more effective, more efficient, more accountable, better at delivering what it's supposed to deliver. But there are certain things that private markets are not going to deliver. There's no profit in it, but there's massive public good in it, right? And that's everything from making sure that the medicines, are safe and proven, to making sure that our food is safe, to making sure that planes can fly in the sky without crashing into each other because we have, we have air traffic controllers that are sufficiently staffed and doing their job. I mean, go down the list. I do think there's a happening important place for private enterprise, not just in driving our economy, but in making people's lives better. There's lots of really important innovation that's happening in the private sector, but government has a really, really important role to play. And throughout American history, I think some of our greatest achievements have been a partnership between government and the private sector. If you think about, the classic example, obviously, is the internet itself, right, which was developed with DARPA involvement, Defense, Advanced Research Project Agency, with public money, revolutionized the world. The same thing is true about a lot of the innovations in artificial intelligence right now. Same thing is true about a lot of medical advances and, medical devices to treatments that are curing cancer. So those partnerships are really important. But then there are things that I think that the government just needs to be there and commit to. As an example, our infrastructure. One of the things that got that happened during the Biden administration is we finally saw a return to a focus on building our nation's infrastructure, funded a massive infrastructure bill. Unfortunately, very little of it has been implemented yet because we've kind of, let the government's capacity to actually deliver things, shrivel up so much and chipped away at it. And so I think there's an example where you look around the world, our infrastructure is an embarrassment. Our train systems are basically the same as they were 75 years ago. Our electric grid's falling apart, and we're paying the costs. Our roads, are not in great shape, and government has to help with that. So I know that this is a long answer to your question, but I guess what I say is you need a government that is filling those gaps where the private sector is never going to provide the answer. And you also need a government, I think, that is helping to lay a solid floor so that there's a, there's a safety net and there's protection. I think about what this Trump administration is doing when they make it harder and harder for families to access, Medicaid, or for children to get fed at school, or cutting SNAP. They're taking away the safety net that is hugely important to making sure that we've got a solid floor that people can stand on and build from. So I don't know. There's just so much that we need an effective government to do.
Yeah. Well, we've got bridge projects here in town that come from the Biden bill.
Yeah. But, and I'd be curious. I don't know whether it's the case here in Bristol, but it's definitely true in a lot of places that there are projects that have been funded but are taking an awfully long time to get done. And I do think that also gets to something that we as Democrats who believe that there's an important role for government to play also have to acknowledge that we've gotten bad at actually getting stuff done, and we have to get a lot better at getting stuff done. It shouldn't be the case that after massive infrastructure bill gets funded, the only evidence of it is a bunch of signs saying, project coming, right? You actually got to get to a place where we can build stuff well, build stuff fast, do it, cheaply in a way that respects taxpayer dollars. And so that's where I think, DOGE was a disaster because all they did was go in and blow stuff up. But there's a good version of, an effort that's about government efficiency and government effectiveness. And we should be all about that.
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, accountability is everything. It's something where you just can't sleepwalk through things. You don't set something up and just takes it and it goes its own sweet way and it takes care of things. Yeah. People have to have vigilance. People need to be accountable. They need to look at these things and reassess them and see if they're working and doing what they're supposed to do. We here at Bristol Edition, of course, are a local newspaper. We call ourselves, we're an experiment in bringing local news back. We've had some relative success doing that. And I think part of the ecosystem for news is such that you need to have those local connections. Things build on that, the same way you're talking about the way things build on infrastructure. And I don't want to lecture or anything like that, but I think about the ecosystem a lot, and then somehow this has caught my imagination, what we're doing here. And a lot of the criticism we have for the, let's say, the diminishment of society has to do with, like, social media and things like that. But I think when you think about the decimation of newspapers and family newspapers across the country, and there's no more coverage and there's no more accountability on local levels and things like that, I think that's something we're trying to kind of patch up and work with right now. So that's why we're doing this, and that's why it's terrific. So we're Bristol centric is what I'm trying to get at. So in this, like I talked earlier about connecting the dots for our people, there's we talk about Congress people bringing in funding for local areas, and then and other people talk about pork. It's like, part of government is to kind of make sure that we can make the local system work.
Yeah.
So if you're a person in Bristol and you've already touched on a number of these issues, can you pick one or two issues to show how what you're doing in the direct effect of what would happen as a congressperson would have, say, a middle-income person in Bristol, Connecticut?
Yeah. So I think there's two different questions, right? There's one is, what are the things you're going to do that are going to affect people in Bristol and also people all over the country?
All over the country.
And then there are things, what are you going to do that affects Bristol as a community? Right. So the first part is, if we realize that our healthcare system is broken and we finally start getting ambitious about a bigger fix that makes makes it possible for more people to access healthcare and to do it less costly and to have better health outcomes, everybody in Bristol is going to feel that.
Right.
If we recognize that the federal government's had a role in housing ever since the GI Bill or before. Anybody thinks that the federal government hasn't been a part of creating housing opportunity hasn't read their history. Right?
Well, just to note, in Bristol, over at Cambridge Park, we have one of the oldest GI based housing projects that are left in the state of Connecticut. Most of them are raised.
That's right.
We're thinking of renovating over at Davis Drive or Cambridge Park.
Right.
So there's a connection.
That's a great example. And that's the kind of ambitious action by the federal government that made people's lives better. But that's 75 years ago now. We need a new generation of a commitment to things like housing opportunity, and people in Bristol will feel that if we do that. Then if you talk about what are the things that here in town might look different. It's what you said. I think it's trying to bring resources back for projects that make a difference. You know, if you've been following what's happening in Waterbury over the past couple weeks, but you know, their entire stormwater, sewer, you know, water system has collapsed because it's a century or more old. That's not just true in Waterbury. That's true in most of Connecticut's communities.
If you go,
and I bet you it's true here in Bristol.
If you go through Bristol over the past winter, you would see every other week there was a water break.
Right, and
we
so
experienced one just last summer in our house.
Yeah. And so that's a perfect example, right? You may not be thinking about that every day when you're driving down the street, but you'll be thinking about it when the water main breaks and you can't get water for a week.
Stop thinking about it.
And that's and that's beyond the capacity of any single community to fix. You know, there's not enough resources in a community like Bristol to rebuild the water system that was built a century ago. But the federal government has the capacity, and the federal government has a responsibility, I think, to make sure that we're rebuilding our infrastructure. So that's an example. It would be working hand in hand. In this case, I'm so thrilled that, you know, if I got there, I'd have the opportunity to work hand in hand with Mayor Ellen, you know, and you know, who I got to know when I was mayor, and say, you know, Mayor, what are the needs that you're focused on? What are the priorities that you see have to get done, but you don't have the resources to do it? And then fight like hell to try to bring those resources here, and also fight like hell to raise those issues up, because I guarantee you that, you know, whatever those issues are, whether it's housing, whether it's, you know, stormwater infrastructure, whether it's water mains themselves, I guarantee you that there's lots of other communities facing those same issues, and it's building a coalition of members of Congress to say, we as a country have to tackle this stuff for the sake of the communities we represent.
And Connecticut is very parochial.
Yeah.
We have 169 towns, and each of them is unique.
Yeah.
And they like to think of themselves as unique. You're covering 27 different communities. If you were to be elected. And communications, I imagine, are really important. And trying to maintain that infrastructure, however you do that, developing relationships with, say, a mayor or mayors. How do you do that with the massive amount of responsibility that you have? You know, keep those local connections, and then also national ones, and keep everything in perspective.
Oh, look, I think that's one of the reasons why sometimes it's healthy to get some, you know, some renewal in these positions every once in a while, because fundamentally what that takes is somebody who is determined to do it. It takes time, it takes energy, and it takes a determination to stay connected to the communities you serve. And after you've worked a 10-hour day, to spend 2 more hours making phone calls and checking in with folks. You know, that's what it takes. And that's what it takes. That's what it takes as mayor. You know, that even though it's just one of those 27 communities, you know, in mayor of the capital city means you're constantly doing that work of trying to stay in contact with folks throughout the city. For 2 years, I was also the president of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, which means I worked hand in hand with the mayors and first selectmen, the municipal CEOs all across the state. And, you know, and tried to get really familiar with the challenges that every community, every type of community was facing. And I think in that job of Congress, you have to do that. But I do think that's one of the reasons it's good to get, you know, just somebody who's hungry to do that work, who is determined to do that work, and is just bringing some new energy to it.
That's great. Luke, it all sounds great. I mean, you're bringing up some great points. Honestly, what are your strengths in order to get some of these things achieved? For the people out there who you may be needing their vote, why they should back someone like you up? What are you providing that's different than the same pitch that we hear every so often? What makes you different than the other politicians we see asking for our vote?
Yeah, I mean, look, one thing I'd say is I hope people see that when I talk about working hard, I mean it. You know, a lot of folks here saw me for 8 years working as mayor of Hartford, and I put blood, sweat, and tears into that job 24/7 for 8 years. And then when I felt like it was time to pass the torch, I passed the torch. And I've taken these 2 years and recharged and done a lot of thinking and gotten ready to do something else. But when I do something, I do it all in. And that's how I hope to be able to do that work on behalf of our district.
No, I respect that. Sometimes it's hard for us to, you know, we want to do the job, but you have the mindset to know, hey, I need to pass the torch on and do what's right for the position.
Yeah.
And which is a hard decision, I imagine.
Yeah, it was. Look, I love the job of mayor, but I believe in the job of mayor just like I believe in the job of Congress, that it's healthy to do that work as well as you can, and then pass the torch and let somebody new come in and do it. The other answer to your question is I have. You talked a little bit about this at the start, Aaron, but when I came into the job as mayor, I came into to run a city that was in distress. The city of Hartford was bankrupt. It was not in bankruptcy, but it was totally insolvent, and it was in true fiscal crisis. And we built partnerships and we built coalitions and we did some really difficult things, but we did it together, bringing a community together, laying out a vision of where we were going to take the community, even if it meant going through some hard stuff to get there. And then after that, we built together and brought new partnerships to the table and started to get some real momentum and get some, real investment and some new energy building, and then smacked into COVID and had a whole different type of challenge that we had to face. But I hope people also saw that, the way I tried to do that work, and I hope I did it well, was by bringing people together, by laying out a vision and getting people, invested in that vision, that shared vision, and recognizing that you may disagree with somebody on one issue, but that doesn't mean that you can't work with them on another, and constantly stay committed to saying, how do we figure out a way to do this together? And yeah, the job of a mayor is different in a lot of ways than being a member of Congress, but fundamentally, they're both about working with people. They're both about, having a vision that you want to achieve, and then recognizing that you don't get to just, give orders. You got to build coalitions and partnerships to get stuff done. And I think I've got a lot of experience doing that.
Do you think you work for the people or with the people?
Both. I mean, I think to work for the people well, you got to work with the people.
Now, you think you left Hartford better than before you arrived?
I do. I also think we prevented a lot of really bad stuff from happening. I mean, the city of Hartford, I think, was really on the precipice of what would have been a catastrophe. The city was about to fall off a cliff financially. And I think we prevented some really, really devastating things from happening. And then we got to a place where the city could get stable. Now, I will say the pandemic was a gut punch for the city of Hartford, like it was for a lot of places, but especially in a city like Hartford, which has so much commercial property downtown, and for so long depended so much on people coming into offices and commuting in, and then while they were in the city working, also spending money, going out to restaurants, getting lunch, going to stores. To have so many of those people not in the city for 2 years was devastating. And that's going to be a long recovery. My view was that one of the most important things we could do, both before the pandemic and in response to the pandemic, was focus on housing and housing opportunity and creating a more vibrant residential neighborhood in and around the downtown that had become too much a commercial office park. And we made some really good progress on that. And we also got a lot of seeds planted that I think are starting to grow. So if you come to Hartford right now, you see next to the ballpark that we got built, you also see a lot of housing development happening. You see a lot of vacant buildings that were brought back to life and converted into apartments. And just like in Bristol, the housing, that Ellen got started or got built when she was mayor last time around has brought new life to the community. And that's true in Hartford too. And we did it at a scale that the city hadn't seen in a long, long time.
Yeah. And the people of Bristol. So, are you thinking, hey, look, folks, look what I did in Hartford. Now, the way I worked, as hard as I worked in Hartford as mayor, that's how hard I work for you, citizens of Bristol, if you're elected into the seat.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also, like we said before, I put a really high priority on getting out there and talking with people. When I was mayor, I had a town hall every single month. We do it in a different neighborhood, different time of day, different, trying to make sure that it made it easier for people to come. But not just that, I went out and knocked on doors even when it wasn't election time, just because I wanted to hear what was on people's minds. And, you can't do it exactly the same way when you got to be in Washington half the time, but it's going to be really important to me to be out there hearing what people are feeling in this district, in this community, and in the 26 others, and then fighting like hell to try to represent those perspectives down in DC.
Awesome. Among some of your initiatives in Hartford, you created a youth services corps.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about environmental responsibility, And then you also talked about you fighting for a second chance society.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued by, I mean, you know, we talk about bankruptcy, of course. We talk about innovation, of course. But these seem to be parts of conversations you might have had, recognizing that there was a value to a youth services corps. So two things. How did that come about?
Yeah.
Let's use the youth services corps. And do you see any opportunity, say, on a national level
Yes.
or something similar?
So, you know, we didn't talk in advance of that, but I'm grateful for that question because I couldn't have asked for a better one. This is something that's really close to my heart. This is one of the things that I'm proudest of in Hartford. It was, you know, when you come in to a city that's in financial crisis, you know, you got to fight the battle that's in front of you. But the thing that I wanted to do first was to create the Youth Service Corps because I thought it was something we desperately needed. Let me just step back and tell folks what that is.
Yeah.
The Youth Service Corps is a program that is specifically built for young people who are disengaged or disconnected. You know, they're of school age, but they may have dropped out of school, or they're graduated from high school but not employed and not in, you know, not going on to education. In many cases, it was young people who've had some trouble with the criminal justice system, young people who had experienced homelessness, young people who may have had some involvement with DCF, young people who faced extraordinary challenges in their lives. And we built it not just so that, you know, not to be something that would do something for them, but that would create the opportunity for those young people to get what is almost in almost all cases their first real job, paying job, earn a paycheck, and see what it feels like to earn that paycheck. And at the same time, get connected to a set of mentors and coaches and resources that would help them build a plan for what came next. And even though we didn't have the money to fund it, we went out and we fundraised. We raised philanthropic dollars. We made the case as to why this mattered, and we were able to build it in that first year that I was mayor. We did it in partnership with a great organization in Hartford called Our Piece of the Pie, and then we grew it in the years that followed. And at this point, you know, thousands of kids in Hartford, literally thousands of kids have had the chance to be members of the Youth Service Corps, to earn that paycheck, to feel the pride that comes with it, and earn that paycheck by doing things that matter in the community. You know, everything from building gardens on vacant lots, you know, or planting gardens on vacant lots, to building benches that are in those gardens, to doing work, staffing community meetings, and feel also that pride of doing something that matters in the city that they're part of. And I think that we really could use something like that on the national level. You know, I think I'm actually really excited that Connecticut has already begun to build something like that statewide. There has been some pilot funding to expand that Youth Service Corps model, and Stamford has begun doing it. A couple other communities. I'd love to see that happen statewide, because fundamentally, to me, it's about, you know, showing our young people who may feel like they've kind of lost hope or don't see a path, that no, there is a path, and there's a lot of work they can do that'll help let them build the life they want and do things they can be proud of. So I think that's really important. Yeah. And by the way, you know, on a bigger level, I'm a big fan of you know, lots of different approaches to community to national service. You know, I don't think everybody should have to serve in the military, but I would love to see, you know, certainly more opportunity, if not obligation, to do some service, whether it's teaching, whether it's things like the old Civilian Conservation Corps.
I think it'd be terrific.
Yeah.
I think national service, a year of service.
Yeah.
I think because what it does too is, you've been in the military, I haven't been in the military, but what I imagine happens is you are meeting people from across this great big country, and you're getting to know them on a different level, so that when you have other areas of controversy, you at least can talk to each other or know something about the people who are part of your country. Yeah. So 1 year of service would be a terrific contribution. So that's great. We're on the same page about that. The Second Chance Society. Yeah. How do you address that?
So, you know, this is actually one of for me, this was a long-standing priority. The first policy issue that I ever really got passionate about was criminal justice reform. When I was in college, I taught in the New Haven Correctional Center. I taught some GED classes. I actually taught some poetry classes. And I became convinced that we were making some big mistakes when it came to to our criminal justice system, to over incarceration, and as legal counsel to Governor Malloy was part of the work to do some reform statewide, and push what we called the Second Chance Society. But on the ground in Hartford, what was happening is you had so many people coming out of prison and being dropped off on a corner in Hartford, whether or not they were originally from Hartford. The Department of Corrections would drop folks off on the corner in Hartford with nothing in their pocket, with no home to go to, with no family, to go back to, with no job, often with no ID, and then expect that to result in, I don't know what the expectation was, but it's predictable what it results in, right? It results in people ending up back in prison. And so there have been a couple of groups that have been working for a long time to try to establish something like a reentry welcome center, so it could be a place where people could come in coordination with the DOC. Folks would schedule the drop off. They'd come, and we built it. And we built it in partnership with a number of organizations, but Community Partners in Action was the main partner, and it's hugely important because now when folks come back to the community, having made some big mistakes, having served their time, they come back to community and they immediately get connected to a team of folks who understands how to help them get that ID, or how to get them connected to some employment opportunities, or to some housing opportunities, or maybe there's some other paperwork they got to fill out that would be impossible to figure out if you don't have somebody to help you navigate it. And I think that's a really important part of building a safer, stronger community. And it's important to say safer. It isn't just about doing the right thing because it's the right thing, although it is the right thing. But it's also that if you want to build a safer community, then you've got to build better pathways to opportunity. And what the state was doing was crazy. And we built something that I think filled a really important gap. And that's still there. And when we started it actually in City Hall, and then it grew to the point where it now has a freestanding, building on Windsor Street. And that's something that we've also seen a number of cities replicate that. Just like the Youth Service Corps became a model, the Reentry Welcome Center became a model that a number of communities have copied, which is great. And
we're right down the road from Hartford, and I wouldn't know that. Yes, I did this research and we had this conversation.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what you did in Hartford. Your campaign right now, in some of your literature, you talk a little bit about constitutional amendments. You talk about tax reform.
Yep.
You talk about and also inviting new voices into the conversation. So you talk about a fair tax code, where the top and biggest companies pay their fair share. Why is that so controversial?
I don't think it should be controversial.
Look,
this gets back to where we started talking about, what's happened over the last 40, 50 years in our country. In the 1950s, the top marginal income tax rate was 90%. That's when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president. Nobody was calling Dwight D. Eisenhower a socialist, right?
No, they weren't.
When Richard Nixon was president, the top marginal income tax rate was 70%. Nobody was calling Richard Nixon a socialist. I'm not even proposing that we go anywhere near those levels, but I am saying that after decades and decades of creating loophole after loophole that benefit, the wealthiest Americans, after chipping away so that so many corporations pay almost nothing in taxes, after decades of treating investment income so much differently from the income that somebody who's working as a nurse or a firefighter or a teacher or almost anything else has to pay, that it's time to restore some fairness and common sense to our tax policy. And one of the reasons I think it's so critical that we do that is that we really are leaving our kids and grandkids with a mess on there right now. We're running $1 trillion deficits every single year. And I know it's not typical for Democrats to talk about deficits, but this is going to be an issue that just crushes our kids. Interest rates are going to go through the roof to help manage this debt. The costs of buying a house or buying a car are going to go through the roof because of it. And ultimately, our kids' taxes are going to have to go high because you're going to have to either choose between a country that defaults, or taxing the hell out of them. So we need a tax code that's fair, and we need to do it now. And that means making sure that those who've done the best in this country just pay their fair share. I want people to be successful. I want people to be able to build businesses and make a lot of money doing it, but I want them to pay their fair share so that our country can be strong, and so that, you know, we don't have this crazy concentration of wealth that we're seeing right now, which I think is really starting to tear apart the social fabric.
Well, we talk about inequities, and you know, it becomes another hot point, and you know, and people talk about wokeness, but really, when you're talking about what makes a fair society, you've got to talk about what makes it fair.
That's right.
And sometimes you've got to talk about some of these things, and so that's it. You know, living wages.
Yep.
Not being able to live on a living wage or you know what the minimum wage is. I mean, that's a burden.
Yeah.
And it does seem to be the taxes are being shifted more and more away from the upper echelon to more of the middle class, and that apparently, I don't know, I'm talking anecdotally now, it appears to be shrinking, not getting stronger.
The middle class.
Yeah. And so and when we have a stronger middle class, it just seems to work out better for everyone.
Right.
And not an overtaxed one. But I'm also, one of my favorite anecdotes is when Ben Franklin was talking about us forming a new country, and he simply had a phrase where we always hear the other phrase about what is it? There's taxes, you know, what two things you count on. But the other thing he talked about, he says, if you want to be a member of the club, you got to pay for the membership. He says that's taxes.
Yeah,
and that's what we do. And we have a great thing going here. We've got to keep it going somehow. But you talked about a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, to restrict the president's pardon power.
Yeah.
To rein in corruption. These things we don't hear about on the national level, but they have to be part of the conversation.
Well, I mean, I hope
they are.
You say we don't hear. I mean, we're certainly hearing about corruption right now. We're seeing levels of corruption that we haven't seen.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons that people aren't talking about solutions, a lot of people are upset about the problem, and we don't hear enough people talking about the solutions, is because I think we've forgotten that we have the ability to make big changes in this country. You talk about a constitutional amendment, and I think most people now think, well, that's not possible. But we had one constitutional amendment in the last 50 years, and it had to do with congressional pay. It was not a big issue. In the 50 years before that, there were 6 constitutional amendments. We used to know how to make these changes. We used to recognize that just because 9 members of the Supreme Court decided something, that didn't settle the question forever in this country. That our founders gave us the tools in the Constitution to make changes when changes were necessary. And at this point, I believe that the vast majority of Americans don't think that Elon Musk should be able to spend $250 million to help somebody buy a presidential election. I don't think that people believe that the president should have unlimited pardon power, so that anybody who contributes to his campaign or buys his crypto
whatever
his newest meme coin or whatever it is, gets preferential treatment and gets a pardon. There shouldn't be conversation about what's the going rate for a pardon. It shouldn't be the case that the president is immune from prosecution if the president breaks the law. Nobody should be above the law in this country. Unfortunately, establishing those common sense principles right now means we've got to amend the Constitution because of the decisions the Supreme Court's made. And I think we should start talking again about the fact that we actually have the tools to do it. Now, I'm under no illusions that that's going to be easy.
Right.
I know you got to persuade a lot of people, but part of what I'm saying is I think we need politicians who are not just coming in and accepting the political environment as we find it. We're not just coming in and saying, the world as it is the world as it has to be, but are coming back in and saying the job is to help change the conversation about these things and build the will to make these changes. And I just don't see enough vision, enough aspiration, enough ambition in too many people who are doing this work.
You're absolutely right, Luke. I mean, listen, I come from a small city, Corpus Christi, Texas, down in the south of Texas, okay? And we're very simple people. How are you going to help me and my family? It's quite simple. You've been quite outspoken tonight. Might I say you're a little bold? you've been quite outspoken in some things you've said, especially against the current president. I'm getting questions online at the moment. Is that are you going to be as bold if you were elected as to be on the side of looking to impeach the president if you were elected? I keep getting the question on social media, so I had to ask.
I think there's no question that this president has, committed countless impeachable offenses. What I'd say is I want to help the Democratic Party win enough votes in Congress that impeachment would actually mean something. I'm not interested in symbolic actions. I'm interested in actions that make a difference. And what that means right now is we need to win. And we need to win by big enough numbers that we can actually make some change.
We see a rise in the younger generation going out and wanting to participate, wanting to make a difference, doing things on social media to give their side, because sometimes they may feel that their perspective isn't being heard, that some of the politicians and the people in office are not listening to what they're saying. They're literally parading and marching down the Capitol buildings in each state and feel like their voices aren't being heard. Are you going to be on the side of the people who maybe it's different from what you believe or something that you want, but if the people are overwhelming you and this is what we want or this is what we need, how do you deal with that?
Well, I think it starts by doing what I was saying before, which is getting out there and really having conversations, and not just when you face a political challenge or a political threat, but all the time, recognizing that that's a fundamental part of the job, is to be out there talking with people and listening to people. And look, there may be times when I have a very strong view of something, and maybe that differs from folks that I'm talking about. That's the case all the time. When when I was mayor, I never shied away from hard conversations. I always, said what I thought, explained why I thought it, but also kept an open mind, an open ear, an open heart, and a willingness to be persuaded. And I think that's what we should expect in our politicians. But I think the other answer to what you're saying is, I think people need to feel like their involvement in politics actually leads to something. And that's one of the reasons why I think there is something important about having competition in our political system to begin with. Because we have districts that are overwhelmingly blue or overwhelmingly red. In this case, this district's overwhelmingly blue. Because of that, we have a member of Congress who's a good guy, who I respect, who I've worked closely with, but we have somebody who's been in there since 1998 and has never faced a serious challenge. And I don't think that's healthy for our politics.
Who are you speaking of?
I'm talking about John Larson,
okay.
our Congressman Larson.
I'm from Texas. I'm getting the lay of the land here. Okay.
Yeah. So again, like, with no disrespect to John Larson, I don't think it's healthy for our democracy for somebody to be in office for almost 30 years and never have competition to win that seat. And that's why I think that I see no tension between saying I'm a proud, loyal, strong Democrat, and I think we're healthier when we have some primaries like this. And also, I don't intend to make a lifetime of this. I'd be honored to have the chance to do this work for 8, 10, 12 years, and then to pass the torch, just like I did as mayor, and let somebody else continue that work. I think we're meant to have a government where people don't see it as a lifetime appointment or a lifetime career, but who do the work best they can, and then pass the torch to somebody else to carry that work forward.
Yeah, well, you've proven that you're capable of doing that. You did that already. That, hey, when it's time to hang up the gloves, you knew when that time was, and you moved on to something else, and you're using your experience from your past to propel you into the future and the betterment of not only the state but for our country.
And of course, there's the issue of John Larson, and you just represented your position, I think. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say about that, or it's just the idea that there's competition among Democrats. It's healthy, and a lifetime in service is commendable. He's taken strong positions, I guess most surely on Social Security, and those things are good things, and I think people have benefited from those things.
Yeah,
and yet this you see as a time.
I do. And I think, and I'm out there every day talking with folks, and I think a lot of people see it as the time that we need some change, and we need some new voices and some new energy. And let me just talk about Social Security. I would be proud to take up that mantle and be a strong voice to protect Social Security. I want Social Security to be there for not just folks who are getting it now, but for me, for my kids. I'd be proud to carry on that work, just as John Larson, took that issue up from his predecessor, Barbara Kennelly.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara Kennelly, was a real champion for Social Security,
Absolutely.
and John inherited that passion from her. I would be proud to do that work, but in a moment like this, it cannot be the only issue that we're talking about. And for a lot of years, it's sort of the only thing that I've heard John Larson talk about. And it would be one thing if he wasn't just talking about it, but he was getting stuff done on the Social Security issue. But the truth is, we haven't seen any major legislation on Social Security in decades. And I don't say this with any disrespect, but Congressman Larson has been introducing the same bill on Social Security for more than a decade, including when he was chair of the Social Security subcommittee, when the Democrats had the presidency and the Senate and the House, and the bill didn't even get out of committee. So there's also a difference between talking about things and demonstrating that you can move the needle and get them done. And, maybe it's time for a different approach. But again, I'd be proud to be a fighter for Social Security, but it won't be the only issue you hear me talking about.
I had one other question I thought was interesting, and I think we're probably
we got about 5 minutes left.
about 5 minutes left. So, your military training. I'm just, there's a whole civics education course there too, and I'm thinking that as being part of the military, you were educated in certain ways about the American government, what it stands for, and how to support it. Is there any thing that you could talk to in that way? I mean, we've got some interesting things happening right now.
Yeah.
And but I'm thinking that of the people I admire most are the military in this country, which is ruled by civilians, and that just gives it a whole different dimension than lots of other places in the world, and that was by design. And so, is there any part of that education that's been kind of drilled into you as a person, as a respect for our government and what it stands for, and how to uphold that government as a citizen?
I mean, I guess I'm not sure that this is exactly the question that you're asking, but I guess one thing I'd say is when you take that oath, when you serve in the military, you're signing up, and we have an all-volunteer military, right? So you're signing up to go wherever you're asked to go, and to do whatever you're asked to do within the limits of the law. And so what I take from that is that we owe our service members a profound responsibility to make sure that we are, treating their sacrifice and their willingness to do that work with the respect that it deserves. That we are not going to commit them to wars without real good reason and without careful thought and planning. That we're not going to put them in harm's way unless it's really necessary for the security and safety of our country. That anybody in a position of civilian leadership is going to recognize that our service members have taken a sacred oath, and we owe them an obligation in return. And right now, what I see is a president that I think is treating the military cavalierly, without sufficient respect. And that means everything from using the National Guard to pick up trash in our nation's capital, to uses of force that I think threaten to destabilize the world in some pretty profound ways. So I don't know that answers your question, but I guess I'd say that from my experience of having served in uniform, and I served in Afghanistan, right? I mean, maybe I'll come back and answer it a different way. When I served in Afghanistan, I was a Navy intelligence officer. I served on the anti-corruption task force there. I was not in combat. The work that I was doing was as part of a team that was supposed to be helping to bring about a political settlement that our men and women in the field were fighting to buy time for, right? The idea was that our men and women who were out fighting the Taliban and terrorist groups around Afghanistan were buying time for a political settlement so that you could have a long-term stability and a legitimate government in Afghanistan. The problem was nobody in the American government had any idea what that political settlement would actually look like. And so fundamentally, we were asking our men and women to fight for, let's say for a lie, but for a fiction that there was some plan, and there wasn't a plan. And that actually affected me very, very deeply. I feel very deeply that if you're in a position of responsibility, one of your most fundamental obligations is to be willing to raise your hand and say, this isn't working, or this is wrong, or this, this is broken, and acknowledge that. I think a lot of the problems that come, that happen, whether we're talking about the city of Hartford, where, for years and years, my predecessors allowed it to get closer and closer to fiscal collapse without raising their hands and saying, hey, we got a problem here. Or whether you're talking about 20 years of war in Afghanistan, asking so many American soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors to be out there risking their lives without a real plan. I take really important lessons from that, which is that if you're in a position of authority, one of your biggest responsibilities is to be willing to be honest about whether or not what we're doing is working. And to bring it back to the bigger thing that we're talking about here, I think this is a moment when there's a lot of stuff that's not working in our country, and we have to be honest about it. And we have to recognize that we got to make some big changes. And I think that starts with making some changes in who's doing the work.
Awesome. One last thing I have here. We're gonna make this very short, rapid fire. If you have anything, feel free to chime in here, David. Real quick sentence, one sentence answers or one word answers, whatever you may like. Okay. Just tell me what comes to mind when I bring these things up.
Okay.
I'm gonna start with the hardest one. Can you give us a hot take? You got a hot take? Give a little something.
Hot take. Oh man. I know
you establish yourself as bold. You're willing to say what you need to say. I'm giving you an opportunity right now on this platform to give us a hot take.
Yeah. This probably doesn't qualify as hot take, but I can't get it out of my mind all day. I think right now we've got a president who is basically trying to create a world where you have superpowers with spheres of influence where they can do whatever they want, and it's a really scary thing. And everybody in this conversation, this is not a one word or one sentence.
Go ahead.
But this conversation about Venezuela, it's all about, should he have consulted with Congress? Should he, was it constitutional what he did? To me, there's the bigger question is, we have a president who is undoing all of the things that allowed us to have 75 years of stability in the world. And that's really scary.
I was just going to say no pineapples on pizza, but that was my hot take. But
yours is a better hot take.
But that works.
But I can't, I honestly, I've just been, it can't get it out of my mind all day today.
All right. Bristol.
Yeah.
What comes to mind when you hear the word Bristol?
I mean, the biggest thing for me is opportunity. This is a city that was a thriving center of manufacturing that created so many things. And I still think, I spent a lot of time in Bristol. I've driven around Bristol. I think there's just a lot of opportunity in this community, to get more stuff built, to create more housing opportunity, to get more industry in again. I see a community like Bristol, and I see a place that it's just a great community that has a lot of potential and could use some more partners in helping it to grow.
If I had to summarize in 3 words, Luke Bronin. Hey, you had a Luke Bronin on the show. Tell me about Luke. If I had to put 3 words, what would those 3 words be?
Dad. No, that's the only thing. That's the most important thing to me. I got 3 kids, 14, 12, and 16. America, because this is to me, that is the thing I believe probably most deeply in, is what this country is supposed to be in the world and what it can be. Could have been a contender, on as a country star, but blew it. Music is my passion.
What kind of music you listen to?
I listen to a lot of stuff, but I play sort of folk country rock stuff, although I don't play all that much anymore. And
I heard something about a
practice enough.
I heard something about a song.
Did
you sing a song? Are you a singer? What's going on?
I did. I recorded an album right after college that you can find it. It's on Spotify. You can check it out.
Oh, we found.
But one of the songs was on. You were talking about this, David.
Yeah,
one of the songs was on Dawson's Creek. That was my brief and only moment of commercial success musically, and it was fleeting.
And you taught poetry, and the questions for them. Yeah, that's it. Do you write poetry?
I mean, I have written poetry, but not that I'd let anybody read.
Right.
Yeah,
But I
get
do.
that.
I love to read. I read a lot. You know.
Yeah, and before we say goodbye, Luke, thank you so much for joining us. I wanted
Thank
to
you.
give you one opportunity
Yeah.
to just speak, not to us. We've asked our questions. We had a conversation with you, but speak to our viewers. Speak to the people who are looking for their next congressman, people who are looking for change from someone who actually gives a damn, if I may say so.
Yeah.
Someone who's going to change their life and stand for what they may believe in, or may want someone who is actually going to fight for them, not against them,
Mhm.
which may be a sentiment. But I want to give you, just you and our viewers, a quick private moment, and you to talk to them and say whatever it is that you need to say.
Yeah. First of all, thank you again for having me on. I mean, a year or two ago, I wouldn't have run this race. You know, I would have said, we have a member of Congress who is a good man, who is a Democrat like me, who mostly votes the right way, and that's good enough. And right now, I think we're in a moment where that's not good enough, because we are in a moment where we're facing a real crisis in our country, and we've got to start doing things differently. And so, you know, I've launched this campaign, which is an unusual thing to do, to primary somebody who's been in Congress for a long time. And so I guess what I'd say is, if you want somebody who's going to play it safe, don't support me. If you want somebody who's just going to, you know, go by the same playbook, don't support me. But if you want somebody who's going to call it like he sees it, and not be afraid to take risks, and not be afraid to lose the job if those risks, you know, mean that, you know, there's a political cost, then I think I'm your guy. You know, and I think this is a moment when we need people who are willing to call things like they see it, and recognize that we need to make some bigger change, and show that they're not afraid of taking those risks. And I think by running this race, I've shown that. So I appreciate the chance to be here, and I hope to have the chance to do the work on behalf of the city of Bristol and the 26 other towns in this district.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Luke.
you.
Thank you so much, Luke.
Great to be with you.
You are watching Talking Bristol. Yes, it's our new weekly show with David Fortier. We want to thank Luke Bronin for being on our show today, giving us insight and some knowledge. You can play back this video on YouTube and Facebook if you'd like, if you didn't have time to watch now. We want to thank you for watching once again. Don't forget, tomorrow we have The Avenue. We have a very special guest coming up tomorrow on The Avenue. You're not going to want to miss it. And stay tuned next week for another show with David Fortier, the editor-in-chief of the Bristol edition. Good night, Bristol. Thank you for watching.